Hello, I'm Daniela Gaidano from Italy. This talk was recorded for connection issues, so you cannot interrupt me with questions, but I'll be with you at the end to take your questions. First of all, my deepest gratitude to the women in Lutherie community for welcoming me and for giving me this speaking opportunity. Let me introduce myself. I've been a string maker for 15 years, co-owner of the Aquila Chord Harmonica String Factory. I was a professional viola player, and this, of course, raised my curiosity about the tools that I was using. And making strings gave me the opportunity for research in museums and in the field. So my main sources are not only written treatises, but mainly people that I had the occasion to interview. These men and ladies were string makers in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and they shared with me their knowledge. They explained the old treatises. They made for me similar tools that were those that they were using in their working lives. So what we'll be talking about? First, an overview of the Italian production and environment, then an overview of the European production and the development of strings in the same years, and finally, what this meant for violinists in their everyday life. I will not speak only about violin, because viola and cello share their string with the violin. The second and third of the violin are the first and second of the viola. The third of the violin is the first of the cello, and the fourth pure gut of the violin is the second of the cello and the third of the viola. I will not speak about double bass, because double bass strings have a completely different technology and also a completely different history. So this would be a great talk for another moment, I hope. I will speak about guitar because, as you can see here, strings for guitar are the same strings of the violin. The first three of the guitar are the same three strings of the violin, just double length. So let's dive deep in our presentation. How were the strings in Italy in 1848? They were three pure gut, and the G was a covered gut with metal wire, which could be silver, copper, or silver coppered. Exactly the same string of the Baroque period, because nothing changed from the late 17th century up to the 19th century. And how were these strings? The professional string was, first of all, Italian. It was flexible, it was vibrating, it was well twisted, high twisted. Here you can see it. This is a musical string, a string made for music. Exactly what we see in the paintings from the 17th century. This is a Basquenis, and you can see the strings coming out of the back box and stored in a bundle. That is something that you can do only with a very flexible string. String makers were 90% coming from Salle, this little village in Abruzzi, and they were moving to Rome and Naples for the working season, which was spring and summer, which were the seasons in which people ate more lambs. So lamb gut was very delicate. It couldn't be shipped to the mountain, and it had to be worked in place. Then they turned to their village, and the women were staying in the village all the time to take care of the animals and the land and to make strings with sheep gut. All the family was working making strings. But in 1848, we had wars, civil war for the Italian unity. It's like 30 years of war in which these people suffered from poverty, hunger, new taxes, new laws, and so they became brigands, men and women together. This meant that they couldn't work, they couldn't move to the towns to make strings anymore, so they lost their hegemony, their monopoly in Europe. This is a canyon that is just outside the village of Sale and gives the idea of how isolated they were. To go to the closer village, which is the one that we see at the end there, they had really to go down to the river and then climb up. In 1905, we have an account of their way of making strings and their life by Luigi Forino in the little book Il Violoncello. We have another proof that it was really the same from the Baroque period up to now. But in 1905, also another thing happened, many earthquakes. Actually, from the end of the 19th century up to 1932, many earthquakes destroying the village. So these people had no alternative than emigrating. Most of them emigrated to US. This is Daniel Mari, the founder of Mari String Company. And these are pictures from the company in Long Island, New York, in the 40s. Then we had the First World War, which meant a high demand of surgery floss. Surgery thread is made by gut, with the same gut of the musical strings, but it was a wider market and also a more profitable market. So it was easier to make surgical thread, which was just a couple of gauges, instead of making all the gauge of musical strings, which also had problems of resonance and quality problems. In the 20s, in Italy, we had fascism. This meant music was censored, dancing in public was forbidden. So this is where we lost all our legacy of amateur musicians and also of ballet. Now in Italy, we have less than 20 professional orchestras. I think 2 professional ballet companies, because we didn't have any other government trying to restore this legacy. Instead of music, sport was supported, because of course a sportsman makes for a better soldier than a musician or a dancer. And one of the most popular sports was tennis. Tennis uses gut strings, and with the same technology of that made for surgery thread. Then we had Second World War, with all the problems again of being in a war. And I would shift a bit to the situation in Europe. Of course, in Europe, there were many local manufacturers, but they didn't offer a professional quality. We would say they were offering more sort of an average quality. This is the village of Musellaro, close to Sale in Abruzzi, the one that we saw in the other picture. And the castle is named the Castle of Savarese e Sarra. Here is where the people of Savarese came from during Napoleon times to found the Savarese company in Paris. This is another company, but it's just to give the idea of the different environment in which the European string makers were working. Giorgio Pirazzi was an Italian string maker who moved in the middle of the 19th century to Offenbach, founded the company there, but his company suffered from a fire in 1875, was completely destroyed. So he partnered with his childhood friend Theodor Strobel. Pirastro comes from Pirazzi and Strobel. And Theodor Strobel convinced him to introduce new machineries. One of them, the polishing machine. This polishing machine is a trolley machine. In that trolley, there is some sandpaper. The strings are rolling very fast, and the trolley is going up and down, polishing the strings. To be employed this machine, the string must be longer, stiffer, less twisted, so less flexible and musical. This is what happens when you polish a string. The upper one is not polished, the lower one is polished. So you can see that the fibers are broken. You can well imagine that the string is more sensible to humidity changes and also weaker. So later in the years, they added some glue to reinforce it and also varnish. So varnish is something that is added to a weak, a damaged string to try to keep it together. It's not a sign of quality. And this is the strings that comes out. It is not flexible, it is very rigid, very stiff. And if you ply it, it almost breaks, which is not good. This string is very suitable for surgery. It is perfect for tennis. So how they did introduce it to the musical market? With a common marketing tip, they invented the problem of the pure fifth, of the perfect fifth. That is when you put your finger trying to take a fifth on the violin, and you find right the fifth without having to move the finger. So they say that these strings that were perfectly smooth and polished and stiff they were giving you the perfect fifth. This problem of the pure fifth is something that is never mentioned in the old treatises. It comes out really from pure air at the end of the 19th century. Again, from Forino in 1905, we have a description of this situation. He still says that the Italian strings are the best and that the professional players use only Italian strings. German strings have the good side of resistance, and like all the products of that nation, they also have that of an affordable price. They are very polished, they are stiff, and so they seem made of steel. Even the sound is affected by that stiffness. This is an image of a quality, a proud quality of a German string compared with the quality of an Italian string. The First World War is approaching. This means research on metals, on metal wires. So steel strings become available just for the E string. And we can put them here in our timeline. Researches for war, weapons, and planes also pushed a lot the research on aluminium, which is the lighter metal. Aluminium was very precious because they didn't have a way to obtain it affordably. So they found this way in 1865, but they introduced it on large scale only at the beginning of the 20th century. So it will take some years before it is available for string making. But without that, we couldn't have the wound B. So what did this mean in violinist's everyday life? Carl Flesch published his method, The Art of Violin Playing, in 1923 in Berlin. He says that the strings are changing so much in the calendar that it cannot really say something definitive. In these latest years, professional players use the covered D. It is undeniable that these strings, it's better than the usual gut strings because it's louder and it's easy to get it in vibration, but it doesn't have a nice timbre. And then the passage between A and D, it's really sharp, it's not pleasant. And he also says that the quality of the sound of the A string, if you have a steel E and a covered D, it's compromised probably because of all this metal on the violin. So it seems to suggest the kind of setup that Heifetz used for all of his career up to 1962, which is a steel E, a covered G, and the A and the D on pure gut. Going on with Carl Flesch, he describes the advantages of the steel E. It doesn't suffer for humidity. The timbre is more mellow. It doesn't break. It keeps tuning. And it is very, very cheap. The cost is 1/6 if compared with a gut string. And a professional violinist normally in 1 year uses 120, 150 E of gut, which is something like a couple per week, against 50 or 60 steel E's, which is 1 per week. So a good quality steel E could last up to 1 week, a huge economical advantage. Then he also mentions the disadvantages of the E strings. Between these, it's less brilliant. It doesn't allow us to have a huge variety of dynamics, no pianissimos and no fortissimo. So let me end my presentation telling you the story of Roberto Salerni. He was an Italian string maker from Salle, and he was active between the 2 world wars. Here we have a catalog from 1931 in which he offers the first 3-string of the violin in pure gut, still sold in a bundle of 30 strings. We can compare it with this Pierastro catalog 1929, in which strings are offered single packaged because they were polished on a precise gauge, and only in one set, a D aluminium wound. As a side note, we can see that for the double bass, we still have 3 pure gut strings and just the 4th covered. He was also making strings for tennis, but he is one of the very few to maintain the contacts with the musical world in Italy. He was very active. He was one of the founders of the Violin Making Association in Italy. And going to Rome, spoke to a professional violinist about the idea of covering the A string of the violin. And he approves this idea. So he sent some samples, and the feedback that came is that D and G were very good, but the A is completely unusable. This because to make the A, you need a very thin aluminum wire. We are speaking of a 0.08 aluminum, which is thin and weak. So Roberto Salerni was searching for this wire everywhere, and he's also searching for a ribbon of aluminum, a flat wire, because he understands that with his very thin wire, he can't work it with his hand over spinning machine. So he hopes that with a flat wire, things will become easier. But unfortunately, he doesn't have the technology to use a flat wire, which is a very difficult technology. Imagine when you are trying to put a tape around something round like a pencil or something like that. There are always drinkers around. I have this correspondence of Roberto Salerni from his daughter, and part it is published by Patrizio Barbieri. In April 1951, he receives this letter by Pietro Sgarabotto, the violin maker. Sgarabotto is asking for the covered A. He says there is a lot of expectation. Pirastro succeeded in this. So we have a covered A for the first time by Pirastro in April 1951. So you must do the same. So we can have a complete violin set covered. Roberto Salerni is sending some samples, but then in September, he has to deny the same inquiry by Giuseppe Ornati, the violin maker, because he cannot find the correct aluminum wire again. Finally, in October 1951, he writes to Pietro Sgarabotto, concerning the A, we didn't interested anymore as per your suggestion, and because we couldn't find the right wire. So from this letter, we can assume that also the Pirastro wound A was not so welcomed in the market. It didn't really meet these great expectations. However, in 1951, we have for the first time a wound A. This is a catalog from Roberto Salerni in 1961, and we have EA in pure gut, the D aluminum covered, and the G silver covered. This same situation also for viola and cello, while for double bass, we still have the first 3 in pure gut, and the 3rd and the 4th are offered covered. Just a word about synthetic strings. Synthetics as monofilaments were used on guitar just after the Second World War because players were completely exasperated by the breaking of strings because the surgical thread breaking so often. We know from Segovia, even every couple of hours. While synthetic strings as a multifilament, as a core for the basses, were in use again after the Second World War for guitar. But to use them on both instruments, you need a different technology, flat wire, and we have to wait until 1979, Thomastic dominant. So which is the one takeaway that you can have from this run over these 2 centuries? That this is not a Baroque violin. First, because of the kind of strings in the positions. It has 2 guts and 2 covered strings. This kind of set was not available until 1920, never in the Baroque era. And it was not used by professionals because they preferred to have a steel E and maintain a pure gut D. Second, because of the quality of the gut. We saw that this kind of gut, you see how stiff it is, that part coming out of the knot. This kind of gut is similar to the surgical floss. It's not gut made for music. The Baroque strings must be more twisted, more vibrated, more elastic, and more fat. And last but not least, because these Eudoxa strings are made with flat wire, which was a technology introduced in the 40s, not before. Baroque strings are always wound with round wire, which gives you a similar response under the bow when compared with the pure gut strings. So a bit of a bibliography. There are many works that you can find online by Patrizio Barbieri. They are available on academia.edu, and they are very detailed, interesting, a source of enthusiasm and motivation for me. Then Luigi Forino, in violoncello. This is widespread in Italy. I'm not sure if there is a translation available. The Art of Violin by Carl Flesch, which is something that I believe all the violinists have in their home. This is a very simple bibliography, but very easy to find. Then if you want to read something more, there is my small book that is available also on Amazon, Tables on the Evolution of Strings in the Violin Family, which is available also in Japanese. And then there is a bigger one, which is the precise account of all the interviews, but it's in Italian, sorry. On my website, you can find many video tutorials and, of course, a way to get in touch with me and ask questions. I'm at the end, but before leaving time to your questions, just two very fast tips that they are very basic, but I've seen many luthiers and players getting them wrong. So please stay with me just a moment. First, how to correctly use a micrometer. This is a micrometer. We need this one, not the one that we use in lutherie, because we need to measure cents of millimeters. It normally comes with this little tool, and this tool, with this tool, you can move here so that you have the 0 in the correct position for you, so that when you do this, there is a friction and you arrive to 0. It's very important that you move it only from here and not from here, because from here the friction doesn't work and you will not measure the right thing. So that's it. The other thing is the Mersenne test, the so-called Mersenne test that we find in many, many old treatises from the 17th century. So take a string between the thumb and the first finger, then pluck it and watch the fuse. Can you see the fuse? It has to be even. No things like that inside, no things open in this way, just a fuse. For example, this part of strings that is already being used, here you can see a not so good fuse. Try to do it as much as you can and to close your eyes. You see, you feel not only the sound, but the vibration into your hand here. This is like when you feel, you tap the tone wood to feel if it can vibrate. It's like when you feel the vibration on the top of a cello. It's the same thing. With this, you can actually feel the sound of the string, if it will be good or not, just in your hand. This is very important. This tells you if you have a good quality string or not. So thanks for your attention. Thanks for staying with me. And finally, here is the moment for your questions. Hello.
Hi, Daniela. Thank you very much. That was a fascinating session. And I can tell from the chat that everybody was mesmerized. Thank you very much for preparing it. So we do have a couple of questions. I'll read it out to you. The first question is from Ray Nickel, and she's saying that she noticed that there were women in a few of the photographs you showed us at the beginning of your lecture. Do you have any information on any names of the women involved with string making?
Very little precise information about names. I interviewed 3 women, I think, And so, of course, I have their names and their videos in which they are explaining me how they were making up. And but the pictures of the old factories are normally full of women and children, because every part of the manufacturing process was well, something was typically a male thing, and some other parts were typically women things. So, for example, males were going outside to collect the gut, and women were staying inside to scrape it, to clean it, and this for even 12 hours a day, of course. But this was, I mean, the normal working times in those times. And I know that children getting out of schools, they were going to the factory, working for free all the afternoon, waiting for their mothers. So they were learning the job for free as children. And this is actually why double bass strings were very cheap at the time, because they were working particularly in the double bass strings making. And so, yes, women were probably a major part of the workers at home. While, as I said at the beginning, men were going to Rome and to Naples for the season to make strings with lamb gut, because this is a season in spring and summer. In Rome and Naples, they were eating a lot of lambs, and so men were going there, and women were staying at home working with the sheep gut and with the land at home, and with the children and with the animals and with everything.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, we have a couple more questions and we have 2 minutes. So the next question is from Henriette, and her question is, so the strings now sold as Venice strings are the kind of strings that got used in the centuries before the polishing machine was introduced?
Yes, but not only them. I mean, this is a kind of string, which is a sort of a rope string. So they also call it double wound, but also normal. Well, how to explain? The Venice, it's like 2 or 3 strings twisted together, while what I call normal strings, it's a certain amount of strands of gut twisted together. Then you take 2 or 3 strings, you put them together, and you get a Venice. And a Venice today is polished, however, because today nobody is used to play with very rough strings. Hope that this answers, and maybe I can answer better in the group also if there are still doubts. I can post pictures because.
Yeah, well, I think people would appreciate some answers in the group, because we are definitely out of time for now. No, but thank you very much. Daniela, this was...
Group, tag me, ask questions in the group and tag me, and I'll be more than happy to answer that. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.